Hello everyone. I want to make a video today. Made videos before about Sam Harris. I know, boring, sorry. But this is also about social justice warriors, that whole concept, and American foreign policy and how that seems to be omitted from Sam Harris's view of the world. Also, black people need to learn how to be arrested. That's another thing that Sam Harris says. And he makes false equivocations all the time. Sam Harris is one of those people who lives on the premise that if you don't agree with Sam Harris, you're just not as smart. You just haven't read as much as him. You're just not capable of understanding. He and Neil deGrasse Tyson get together often and pedantically go back and forth about the rest of us plebes who don't have Ivy League educations or didn't grow up rich and aren't mathematics wizards or whatever. So we're not smart enough to understand American foreign policy. We're not smart enough to understand the social justice warrior. We're just social justice warriors. We don't really mean what we say. We're not really interested in helping anyone. We're just more about being oversensitive liberals, that kind of shit. I know those are oversimplifications, and again, Sam Harris does this great thing where he says everything. Sam Harris will point out American foreign policy, but then you gotta weave through all of Sam Harris's bullshit, and you got to get to what he really means. Radical Islam or anybody that is religious is dangerous to Sam Harris. And people that fundamentally interpret the Bible or fundamentally interpret the Quran, which is what radical fundamentalists do, violence, misogyny, tyranny, authoritarian attitudes, those types of things are a danger to society. Again, Sam Harris believes that he's the smartest human being on the planet and his shit doesn't stink. Frankly, he's a rich kid from Los Angeles, and his perspective should be seen that way. His mom was a very successful sitcom writer. She created Benson and a couple of other sitcoms. She's very wealthy. And so Sam Harris grew up with not a silver spoon in his mouth, but a golden spoon in his mouth. And he went to good universities. And now, Sam Harris also believes in reincarnation. Sam Harris thinks that Rupert Sheldrake's onto things. Sam Harris is a classic intellectual who got way too much attention because of his views about Islam and how the Muslim religion is inherently violent, that Islamofascism is because of the Muslim religion and not one's interpretation of the Muslim. And again, he makes distinctions because that's what Sam Harris is very good at. When he's arguing with somebody, he'll make a distinction but move on to his bigger point. He'll go, sure. People that when you're talking to them and they say, sure. They mean what they're saying is, I already know your argument, and you're not as intelligent as I am. And that comes from it comes from either one of two things. It comes from an unbelievable amount of hubris, and it also comes from an insecurity. Sam Harris makes false equivocations. My favorite is concerning black people being arrested. Black people need to learn to be arrested. That's the problem. Sam Harris makes a false equivocation. If a cop comes down the street and they're looking for somebody who looks like Ben Stiller, and Sam Harris, looks like Ben Stiller, then he will automatically do what he'll acquiesce to what the police want, because the police are scared after all. The police are victims. They don't know how to bare knuckle fight and all of this shit. He makes these ridiculous equivocations that you can pick apart in 5 minutes with any kind of logic and reason. And I listened to Hannibal Buress, of course, is on the show Broad City. He's an African-American comedian, and he was a little bit drunk when he tried to debate Sam Harris, and he didn't lose the debate, but he didn't help himself, because when you're drunk and trying to debate somebody, come on. So, and he didn't do a very good job, because Sam Harris's arguments are easy to pick apart. First of all, Ben Stiller isn't a race. Ben Stiller's skin color, people don't identify Ben Stiller by his skin color. Okay, so you looking like a celebrity or anybody else that the police are looking for is not based on skin color or racial profiling or racial stereotyping. So Sam Harris loses that argument right there. Secondly, black people need to learn how to be arrested. Black people should not be driving while black, and when they get pulled over for driving while black, they should kiss the police officer's ass so they don't end up dead. That's what Sam Harris is saying. Learn to be arrested, black people. Never mind the oppression, never mind the tyranny, never mind the police's role in all of this, because they're scared, according to Sam Harris. The police are terrified. Why are they getting out of their car then? They have guns. They have the entire state behind them, and I mean the state, the government. And you can show this over and over again. If somebody reacts negatively to a police officer, God help you. Derek Jensen talks about this violence only being able to flow downward in our society, not upward. So if you were to punch a cop after he arrests you, pulls you over for no reason whatsoever other than you're black, you're not allowed to do anything with the violence upwards because the whole state will come crashing down. And Derek Jensen makes this equivocation with his family. His brother, Derek Jensen, was abused by his father, and his brother's the worst beating that his brother ever took was when his brother stood up to his dad and tried and pushed back, and then the violence just got worse because that's one thing you don't do, and that's an equivocation to the government, how our government runs. Sam Harris also believes that social justice warriors are the worst people on the planet because they actually put context. I mean, I'm not saying all social justice. I don't even know that term is so meaningless to me. It's kind of like cultural Marxism. It kind of reminds me of that kind of a thought process when Marx never talked about multiculturalism at all. But it's that same kind of bullshit. Sam Harris Sam Harris really avoids like the plague American foreign policy and American occupation. And the reason why people do actually become suicide bombers, it isn't because, and there's been books written about this, studies done, please Google it. People become suicide bombers or terrorists because of foreign occupation. America's unabashed support of Israel is another issue the Middle East has, that it feels like Palestine and the Muslim people are treated unfairly. So many of them have no recourse but to commit acts of quote unquote terrorism. And again, one man's terrorist, another man's freedom fighter. And Sam Harris doesn't talk about the 1,000 or roughly 1,000 United States military bases outside the United States. He doesn't talk about the continued tyranny in places that are rich in natural resources and geostrategic positioning. And anybody who wants to argue any of this, actually do some research about where America is before you make a comment on my channel, please. Because if you're not educated enough, I'm just going to block you, and I'm not going to read your comment, and I'm certainly not going to respond to it. If you're interested, I'm not a fan of any religion. I'm an atheist. I don't like the God concept. I think it's the ultimate control mechanism and ultimate conspiracy theory. So I'm an atheist, and Sam Harris is an atheist as well, but he also believes in reincarnation, or thinks there might be something like reincarnation, and believes that Rupert Sheldrake, he's searching for some meaning, he's searching for something in an afterlife. I'm not. I think we're just highly evolved animals, and if you believe that your dog goes to heaven, then I guess you believe you go to heaven. So, or a mouse that you kill, or a fly you kill, or any living thing that you kill, there's a heaven for. Or a hell for, or a place to go. Maybe not even a heaven and hell. Maybe just some sort of afterlife. It's all subjective. It's all you can make up any fantasy you want. You can have any discussion you want about it. You literally can create anything you want after death because nobody knows. So even me, I'm going with my best guess. Okay, I'm just using my analytical skills. But Sam Harris has spent his entire life being pedantic. Sam Harris has never dug a ditch. And I know you're saying to me, what the fuck does that have to do with anything, Jason? Noam Chomsky probably never dug a ditch either. You're exactly correct. However, Noam Chomsky grew up in working class New York, and people like Noam Chomsky, who Sam Harris has attacked, actually have the research and the history of reading and studying and critical analysis that Sam Harris lacks. Sam Harris grew up, like I said, in an not upper middle class, a wealthy home. He's never had a bad day that a snow cone couldn't fix. He doesn't understand the way the world works, and he likes America because it works for his class. So anything that the American enterprise does, and again, he has said, I'm not saying that Sam Harris has never said that the American foreign policy is an aggressive or any of that. He hedges himself constantly. He'll go, sure, and he never gets above this level right here. And he just keeps, and he talks down to people, because if you don't agree with Sam Harris, then you're just not as smart as Sam Harris. When in fact, Sam Harris is frankly a fear-based status quo monster who really doesn't have anything to offer in the way of critical analysis of the American experience. If you are on the side of the police when it concerns arresting African Americans for driving while black, that is a very real thing. I've had it. I've seen it. I've been in cars. And personal anecdotes aside, go Google it and watch cop block videos. Go watch Facebook videos. Go watch people who are literally doing nothing wrong get pulled over, and in some cases get shot and killed because they're tired of being harassed by the state. They're tired of having to acquiesce to power constantly, and only because they're a skin color. And he makes that, when he made that false Ben Stiller equivocation, that was everything you need to say about Sam Harris. Because Sam Harris is either so myopic that he doesn't realize that Ben Stiller is not a race. And don't give me the Jew thing. Nobody looks at Ben Stiller or Sam Harris's skin color and then makes a judgment on that. But they do with blacks. And there is institutional racism, and there is, because police have come out and said, racial profiling is very, very real. They do it at airports. You think, How many brown? I mean, brown people who wear turbans are looked at more, or brown people in general that look like they're Middle Eastern descent are looked at much more after 9/11, and because of terrorism, etc. So they're more looked at than white people would be. When in fact, white people are terrorists as well. The Dylan Ruth, that's a terrorist act. The guy in Canada recently, that's a terrorist act. White supremacy, the guy that shot up the Jewish Holocaust Museum, the guard at the front of the Remembrance Museum, that's a terrorist act. And this goes on all over the world, but we make a distinction when it concerns Muslim terrorists, because Muslim terrorists are the exact enemy that we are fighting in places that the American enterprise and American corporations want to be. This is all pretty well common knowledge. It started with Zygmunt Brzezinski writing the Grand Chessboard, and before then, Henry Kissinger talked about this in the 70s and 80s, that we're going to eventually have to have a major presence in the Middle East. And then the Project for a New American Century, of course, in 2000, continues this idea. That's not important to Sam Harris. And what's disappointing is a lot of people that debate Sam Harris don't bring up these facts, don't bring up these things, because either they don't know about him, or they're not. They're celebrities as well. Like, Joe Rogan's fine, but he's not the deepest guy in the world, right? Hannibal Buress is fine, but he's not the deepest guy in the world. And so they don't seem to have the breadth of information to be able to argue this. Now, I made a Sam Harris Noam Chomsky video, and Sam Harris basically tried to write a book with Noam Chomsky, and Noam Chomsky had no desire to do that. Noam Chomsky made the arguments to Sam Harris about the aspirin factory in the Sudan when the state bombed that, and how that's much worse than a terrorist act. And Sam Harris tried to argue that the state is almost, he will hedge his bets, and he will say sure, and then he'll go forth. But what he really believes is that the United States government, the United States military, is on the side of good. It isn't. The United States military is a murder machine. It is a meat grinder that doesn't. Bill Hicks said it. It's one of my favorite Bill Hicks jokes. The military is to break shit and kill people. That's what the military does. That's it. Esprit de corps, all that other bullshit has nothing to do with it. The military breaks shit and kills people. And once they're hired thugs. Okay? And you can pretend they're not all you want, and you can pretend that the American military is somehow benevolent force for good and has brought freedom in the world. It hasn't. It's brought in chaos, death, the International Monetary Fund, World Bank. One of my favorite writers in this subject is John Perkins, who wrote Economic Hitman and other books. I suggest I wish Sam Harris would read Economic Hitman, but he won't, because that doesn't reinforce his already cultural bias when it concerns the United States. And when you're rich and you work in a university and you're surrounded by fawning teenagers who think everything you do is fantastic because they're just learning for the first time, they're just getting out of a high school system that doesn't teach you how to critically think, and they listen to Sam Harris and he's saying, God doesn't exist. You know that, right? You know that all the shit that your parents told you and all the things that society told you about God, and it's all fake. And they applaud and they love him. And then he goes, and by the way, Muslims are inherently evil, are inherently violent. Their religion, their book is inherently violent. And then you go, oh, well, of course, because they're religious. And he doesn't make a distinction between, like, Reza Aslan does a great job of showing, and I love Reza Aslan. I don't love that some of his, he's very spiritual and I'm not. So that's where I draw, I'm not interested in that. But he makes the point, if you interpret the Christian Bible fundamentally, if you interpret the Quran fundamentally, if you interpret any religious text fundamentally, you will inevitably be violent because of the time they were written and how they're written and how they're structured. And there are people that don't interpret the Christian Bible or the Old Testament or the Quran in a negative way, in a fundamentalist way. In fact, most of those people are, more secular than they are fundamentalist. And that's a distinction that needs to be made constantly. Also, if you choose to ignore American foreign policy, then you choose American foreign occupation and an unabashed support of Israel, regardless of anything. You then will see how poor Muslims in countries who have been persecuted are radicalized. It makes total sense. And that's part of the plan, part of the public relations plan of the Pentagon and the deep state and the CIA, etc., to villainize Muslims, so Americans have zero problem going into Muslim-based countries and taking natural resources, setting up military bases, and really to get the whole world behind The idea that Muslims are inherently violent and Muslims now, if those same Muslim countries had no oil, they had no natural gas, they weren't rich in minerals, they weren't rich in, and I'm not just talking oil and gas. There's tons of mineral riches all through Afghanistan, all through all of those areas. It's called the island Earth, and it's right and geostrategic speaking, geostrategy meaning location on the Earth that is strategically advantageous to the American military. That's another reason why we are in that part of the world. It's right between Russia and China. So Sam Harris, and he'll point all these things out, but that's not the reason why Muslims are fundamental, or why Muslims are violent or reacting against the West the way they are. And Sam Harris does this over and over again. And I watched him and Neil deGrasse Tyson talk, two guys who, if you don't agree with them, you're not smart enough. You're just not smart. You just aren't intelligent enough. And that's your problem, not Sam Harris's ridiculously immature, juvenile, childlike wonder and his amateur analysis of American foreign policy. He promotes this idea, and it is dangerous. It's dangerous to think because he has such an influence on young people. And I think it's dangerous to generalize about any group of people, religion, race, etc. But then to leave American foreign policy is the reason. That's the reason these Muslims that are radicalized organically, that's why they're radicalized. America has almost 1,000 military bases outside the United States. Did you know, this is just an aside, 69 million people last year were displaced from their homes. And it largely has to do with American influence and Western influence in these countries. Syrian refugees, our support of ISIS, but not directly, of course, a backdoor support of ISIS. Our support of Saudi Arabia and their constant funding of terrorist organizations all over the world. Our continued unabashed support of Israel and $3 billion, $6 billion a year to Israel, and not giving any to Palestine, or not giving the same amount to Palestine, or not trying to use American influence to finally stop all this bullshit and get a two-state solution. This is a problem for people who live in other countries, and Americans are very myopic. If you pay attention to only the American media, you know nothing. You don't know fuck all what's going on if you only pay attention to CNN and MSNBC, Fox, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, etc., LA Times, etc., etc. I agree with Trump on that. They are fake news in the sense that they promote the American enterprise and the American empire regardless. It's like what they're doing with North Korea right now, trying to make it so Kim Jong-un definitely killed his stepbrother. Well, there's no proof that he did. There's no proof that gas came from North Korea. There's no evidence of it. But the destabilization process that goes on from the Pentagon and the disinformation, and then it gets filtered down to the media, the useful idiots, is working with North Korea because we want to invade North Korea, and so does South Korea, frankly. I mean, not invade, but they want them to be destabilized. And never mind that North Korea doesn't participate in the International Monetary Fund, will not take loans, does not want to be part of the global economic system, and has been this way for quite some time. It makes again, go back to John Perkins and something he refers to as, and Noam Chomsky talks about this in Parenti, gunboat diplomacy. You go into a South American country, or you go into an Asian country, and you try to negotiate, and they say, we're not interested, and you say, okay, well, cool. Do you see that aircraft carrier in your bay? That's called gunboat diplomacy. Don't worry about that. They're just sitting out there. Don't worry about those F-22s that have been flying around that you see over your cities. You want to fire on those? You want to see what happens. And then you're forced into a corner. And then if that doesn't happen, then you just do regime change, or you overthrow or kill somebody. With Mossadegh in Iran, with most recently you see what happened in Brazil. You saw it happen in Venezuela. I mean, Hugo Chavez was the biggest opponent to the Koch brothers, and now he's dead. Died of cancer. Said before he died, someone gave me cancer. And they tried to assassinate Castro 600 plus times. This is a system that exists, and we all, as Americans, we're inside of it, and we're insulated, and the media doesn't tell us what's really going on, and doesn't show you how much America has oppressed the rest of the world, particularly Muslims. And this is not a very popular opinion in America right now, I get that. And every time I make this video, I get 7,000 Sam Harris clones coming out and telling me that I don't understand fundamentalist Muslims and religion, and I'm misrepresenting what Sam Harris says, and I'm not. Because I've watched and read, I probably watched 10 hours of Sam Harris talking, and I probably read, God, I can't even tell you how much information I've read that Sam Harris has written himself. He's not very smart. He's pedantic, which makes him seem smart. He doesn't have any real life experience that would allow him to, I don't know how many Muslims he knows or how many people he's actually met on that are working class people in this country that come here because of the oppression of their country from America and somehow get here. He doesn't put into context any of the American foreign policy or intrigue that goes on, or he doesn't talk about the overthrows in the different countries and Muslim countries. He doesn't talk about, and I don't even expect him to go into conspiracy theories, 9/11. I don't know, none of that shit. Just talk about the mainstream crap. But Sam Harris won't do that, and Sam Harris will never debate anybody. He likes to debate people that are famous, and I'm not even implying that I would want to debate Sam Harris, because frankly, I'd rather throw up in my mouth and eat it than fucking ever talk to Sam Harris, because Sam Harris is the guy. I'm working class. I'm a Marxist. I'm proletariat to the fucking core. My family, I grew up poor. I grew up around people who worked for a living, worked with their hands, and also had brains and could analyze things. They didn't go to college, but somehow they had this unbelievable ability to analyze. And I've known hundreds of these people, and there's family members and friends. They can analyze what's going on in the world based on common sense and based on a little bit of imagination when it concerned how American foreign. And when I say imagination, I don't mean creating something out of whole cloth. I mean using your imagination to actually piece together the pieces that aren't that don't have official documentation, right, or an official source. And you can put those things together and see, oh my God, America does have 900 plus military bases overseas. Oh my God, they've written books about suicide bombers from other countries, and they've asked people who are terrorists why you are terrorists, why you interpret the Quran fundamentally, or what, and they'll say because of American foreign occupation and Western foreign occupation. And this doesn't just include, I'm just talking about America because that's where I live. I'm not talking about France. I'm not talking about Germany. I'm not talking about any other country. So if you're European and you want to comment on this, great, but don't try to equate America to your country, because there is no country in the world like America. None. There is no country that's as powerful as ours militarily. We spend $600 billion, and that's just the official budget. That doesn't include all the subsidies throughout the year, the line items that you get spent. So it's almost $1 trillion. The next closest, I think, is $150 billion. It's China. $150 billion. And Russia's way down there, like $59 billion. I mean, Saudi Arabia spends more on their military than Russia does. But you don't know this because nobody tells you. Because Sam Harris leaves that out. And if you're a Sam Harris supporter, great. If you like immature, pedantic, wrong, lacking context, analysis of world events, good for you. But it's not making you smarter. It's not making you a better person. And it's certainly not giving you any insight to the future. See what I'm saying? You will never understand the present or the future if you don't understand, you'll never understand the future if you don't understand the present and what's going on with the American military. You'll always look at these terrorist attacks and you'll go, oh my God, these Muslims. And you'll never understand why they're doing it. Bill Maher tried to do this after 2001. He's not even a conspiracy theorist. He lost a show on ABC. He wrote a book called, and I'm not a big Bill Maher fan, and he's become Sam Harris all of a sudden, or he likes what's these two Muslim-hating idiots. That kind of idea, instead of trying to understand what's going on, what happens is you just get further from understanding it, and you just create more of an enemy, and you create more of an irrational fear of something because you don't have any context, because you don't want to have context, because you won't go read anything other than the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. And I'm not talking about conspiracy theories. I'm talking about books that have been written, mainstream books that just maybe don't get as much attention. I mean, I've never seen Michael Parenti on Bill Maher. I've seen Chomsky once. I've never seen Reza. I mean, I've seen Reza Aslan. I don't know if I've seen him on Bill Maher, but but these guys know what they're saying, and they can give context, and they can actually tell you and help you understand why people are fundamentally angry at the West and suicide bomb and commit terrorist acts. And I don't even want to get into the conspiracy theories of how many are state, false flag. I'm not getting into that shit. I'm talking about if we just take a mainstream approach to why quote-unquote Muslims become radicalized, it isn't because of the Quran. The Quran was around thousands of years. I mean, it's been around for 1,000, 1,200 years, whatever it's been, and they haven't been inherently violent. The Ottoman Empire was not, it was destroyed by the West, okay? That was a Muslim empire destroyed by the Western Empire. These people, it wasn't, and there's a lot of reasons for that after World War I, but people kind of forget there's been a war against this Muslims since oil was found in the Middle East. Even before, there's been some holy wars, etc. But really, the wars in the Middle East are because of oil and strategic global positioning. Throw in things like the Strait of Hormuz, throw in the Kuwait War, the first, the invasion of Kuwait by Saddam Hussein, and why the Strait of Hormuz is so important, why Iran is so important. And people, it's a history lesson is needed, not a religious discussion. And if you want to call me a social justice warrior because I'm for context and I'm for really understanding what's going on in the world instead of some kind of immature view of it that is based on fear and love of the status quo, then call me a social justice warrior. Then I'm a fucking SJW. I don't give a fuck. And by the way, using that as a pejorative is so telling, isn't it? That you would use the word social justice and warrior together as a pejorative, as a negative. And you can minimize anybody by calling them a SJW. Oh, you're just an SJW. No, I'm right. So whether or not you think I am or not is probably based on your incredible ignorance and lack of context and information on what's really going on in the world. You don't know what the fuck you are talking about, is what I'm really trying to say. And by the way, the black thing about there is no racial profiling is limited and there's no state and people need to learn how to be arrested and actually being clueless enough to make an equivocation between someone who looks like somebody else and somebody with black skin has got to be one of the most intellectually dishonest things that I have ever heard. I do not like Sam Harris as a human being. I do not like his analysis. I do not like his hubris that I think is more based on insecurity than anything else. Because why in the world would you be so wrong about so many things if you didn't have some deep-seated mental fucking flaws? You didn't have some deep, dark shit going on in your little fucking Southern Californian brain. I mean, Sam Harris, or wherever the fuck he grew up, I'm just curious how somebody can be so hate-filled like Sam Harris and can be so wrong and have so many people think he's right. And then he gets on with Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's good at math. And I have to listen to these two fucking retards talk about subjects that they have no fucking idea about. They haven't read the books. They haven't done the research. They haven't done the analysis. And I got to listen to these two because they both went to Ivy League colleges. And I've got to hear them talk about social issues. Shut your fucking mouth, Sam Harris. You are a fucking dolt. You may be articulate. You may have a large audience full of other oversimplistic fucking retards, but you're wrong. And you help the opposition. You help the worst in our society justify their actions against countries in the Middle East and that are predominantly Muslim by this continued lack of context and this continued ignorance. Thank you for listening, and again, fuck Sam Harris and fuck Neil deGrasse Tyson.